Chapter 22. Jesus spoke to them again in parables. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son." How much planning goes into a wedding?
Way too much.
Was that you, Deb? Yeah. A lot of planning, right? A lot of money, a lot of... I can only imagine being on hold on the phone and whatever else goes on and waiting in line and all that kind of stuff. In ancient times, that's not how weddings were done. Not so much. Their weddings had a fast track and an even faster track in biblical times. The fast track was get engaged and you're married in a couple of days. Now, that doesn't cover the story of Jacob, right? Jacob and Leah, Jacob and Rachel, that's 14 years. That's just, I don't think even weddings I've done have ever had a 14-year engagement. Although I'm doing a wedding this summer, and I think that the kids have been engaged for 10 years. But not 14. And the boy wasn't working off the time with his future father-in-law. But anyway. So, no. And then there was a faster track where they get engaged and the same day they're married. Now, Jesus talks about the faster track with some of his other parables, like the 10 virgins, where the bridegroom's coming today. This thing just happened today. And he had to go do something. Well, what would a bachelor have to do to his house before his wife moves in with him? Clean. Buy a bigger bed. Buy a grown-up bed, right? And maybe a couple of other things. Like get his deadbeat brother to move back in with mom and dad or whatever. Whatever he's got to do, though, he's got to do. And then when everything's ready, when everything's set, then he shows up. In the parable of the 10 virgins, this has been going on. And now he finally shows up. And some of them are caught sleeping. And some, they're all sleeping, but they wake up and everything. Well, now we have this wedding banquet going on. And, I haven't had supper yet. I forgot about this slide. I can almost hear it. I can certainly smell it. Can you smell it? Is it just my laptop? He sent out his servants to summon those who were invited to the wedding banquet, but they did not want to come. Then he sent out other servants and said, "Look, tell those who are invited, look, I prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." This is very similar to the parable we just had, right? So who are the invited people who refuse to come? The Jews. Who are the servants who go out to tell them to come? The prophets and the apostles and John the Baptist and so forth. Who's the king? God. God is the king. What is essentially the dinner, the banquet? What is that? What are we all invited to? Oh, bigger than that. Heaven. I think heaven in general. Do we make any comparison with the food at the dinner? The ox, the fattened cattle, the steak there on the grill that's bugging me? I don't think so. Aren't those just the blessings of heaven ultimately? However, can I just point out that oftentimes when we're told about heaven, God does mention the food and things like that. Will there be food in heaven? Some of the dogmaticians and some modern theologians will put their foot down and say absolutely not. And I'm thinking, why not? Most of the things that human beings rely on will be in heaven. Will that be different? I don't know. But I'm not convinced by anybody who puts their foot down and says no. And I think, I'm going to say this out loud. Are you ready for this? I think they're worried that heaven either would or wouldn't have bathrooms. I really think it comes down to people having a problem with having to go to the bathroom in heaven. But some of the nicest places I've ever been in are certain bathrooms in certain people's houses. They are just a delight. My mother-in-law has the most amazing bathroom with Bible verses everywhere and scented this and scented that, and it's just amazing. There's not a single bachelor lives in that house. I live in a house with 5 bachelors. Our bathroom is not like that. But anyway, let's just go on. But those who were invited paid no attention and went off, one to his own farm, another to his business. What are these things in the parable? The farm, the business. They are the excuses of the people who refuse, right? Isn't it fascinating? What is the focus of modern Judaism? The business and the land. What is the name of the newspaper in Israel, the main newspaper? Haaretz, which means the land. That's because they think that their Savior is the land, the physical soil of Israel, not the Messiah coming, but that the land itself is salvation. Well, I'll move on from that. The rest seized the king's servants, mistreated them, killed them. Again, as with the previous parable, the prophets, many of them abused and murdered. As a result, the king was very angry, no kidding. He sent his army and killed those murderers and burned their town. Did God burn their town? Yeah. 70 A.D., the Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem. In fact, I was talking about this with 2 different people in the last week, and I'm forgetting who they were, but 2 different folks came to me and asked about Pharisees and Sadducees and whatnots. And modern Jews have nothing to do with the Sadducees, the Zealots, or the Essenes, but they're all basically from the Pharisees. That's the only Jewish sect that survived the destruction of the Romans in 70 A.D. So almost all modern Jewish theology comes out of the Pharisees, not the others. I'm sorry, was one of you the one who asked me about this? The difference between Pharisees and Sadducees? I can't think of who it was. It might have been one of the ladies who does our... we have ladies who come in to do like the bulletin and stuff, mailings and things like that, and I think one of them may have asked me, but I kind of forget, because it was a couple different people who asked me that. Let's just go on. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding banquet is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. So go to the main crossroads," or highways and byways, "and invite as many as you find to the wedding banquet." So just go out and look for people. In New Ulm, what's the main crossroads? You'd agree? Probably Center and Broadway, depending on the time of day. Or else it's Broadway and your favorite grocery store. But it's one of those, right? But probably Center and Broadway. Can you imagine just going there to Center and Broadway and just saying, "Hey, I got a party, come in"? Have any of you read The Lord of the Rings? Not read it? In The Lord of the Rings, the main character's name in The Lord of the Rings he's a hobbit named Frodo. His uncle Bilbo, who was the Hobbit of the Hobbit, has a party when he turns 111, 11D1. And he has this big bash of a party, and he invites 144 wedding or guests to come to his party, and he tells them during the party that equals the number. What is 144? What's our slang word for that? Gross. 1 gross. And he says, "That's what you are." And I mean, what an insult to tell all of your relatives and neighbors, you're here to fill up the number of the gross, but that's what Bilbo does. It's kind of Interesting, but that's essentially what happens here. God sends his people out to go and get anybody because he's got empty seats at the banquet. I paid for all this wedding cake. Someone's got to come and eat this, And so that's what happens. So those servants went out to the roads and gathered everyone they found, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. Who are the good and the bad who fill the hall? Yeah, it's me. You're the good and I'm the bad. This is who fills up the banquet. It's the Gentiles that fill up the banquet hall. Finally, there's enough of us, they can get on with the thing. And now Jesus does something that is amazing. He continues the story of the parable to tell a completely different parable. So there's no transition in the story. He just keeps telling the story with the word but. But when, he goes on, so we get that, yeah, they couldn't stand still for that picture, so let's just move on. So, but when the king came in to see the guests, he saw a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. So now it's a new parable. This is the parable of the wedding garment, not the wedding feast, but it's the continuation of the same story. So, remember from Sesame Street? One of these things is not like the others. Three of these things are kind of the same. Do I have to sing the whole song? Anyway, well, I don't remember it. It's 1969 is a long time ago. But back when Sesame was in black and white. So there's a guy there not wearing wedding clothes. This doesn't mean that he wasn't wearing his nice Sunday suit. What does this mean? You're on the right track, but not quite there yet. Mark, do you know?
He rejected, or they rejected what God had given them to him.
In a wedding banquet in ancient times, the guy throwing the party provided everybody with their outfit. He had a rack, like at a clothing store, some of you have, right? You've been downstairs, down in the bowels of the church basement, and we have that one room that's the costume room for Parade of Lights and stuff. What's in there, Laura? All the costumes. But some of them are for wise men and for things. And it's like, if you can imagine all those shiny outfits and with bangles and gold trim and everything and stuff like that. And they're all just on hangers down there. And if you can imagine that at a wedding where you walk in and the guy kind of sizes you up, 44 regular. Here you go. Put that on. And I don't know what size women are. Isn't every woman like a 2 or something? What are your sizes? And is that right? Okay, I don't know anything about sizes for women. Somebody's probably a size 0. I think, isn't that right? They go down to size 0. And then okay, you're a 2, you're a 2, you're a 0, and here you got a look at that guy. You got a barrel chest. You must be a 46 regular and stuff like that. And then Smith, we got this one for you. And they go on. But the one guy here doesn't have the gown. He's wearing his own outfit, which is, did you use the word reject, Mark? Which means he rejected the outfit offered to him. What's the outfit? It's the hidden detail in the parable. What truly is the outfit God requires of us at the wedding banquet, at the feast? Christ's righteousness. The guy rejects the righteousness of Christ. He tries to come in with his own good works. Among the Gentiles, among the non-Jews, among Christians, are there some who want to get in with their own good works? Yes. This next slide, I want you to look at it because I took an hour to make this thing. So animation always takes longer. And it was a wasted hour, but you're going to watch it anyway. Okay? Are we clear about that? All righty. So, He said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without wearing wedding clothes?" The man was speechless. Then the king told the servants, "Tie him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen." So I apologize for the cheap animation, but I'm not good at it yet. But anyway, that's what it. So, but this guy thrown out. Can we get into heaven based on our own righteousness or apart from Christ? No. The more and more churches in the world have adopted this position. It started with probably the Universalists. They have a church in this area in Medelia or Hanska. What do we call them? The Unitarians. Yeah. And it got passed on a little bit to people like there are those in the United Church of Christ who have this view. And then somehow it got into Catholic doctrine that you can get to heaven apart from Christ. If you're just true to your own religion, whatever religion that is, meaning a non-Christian can get to heaven. Of course, who can't get to heaven according to the Catholic Church? Anybody who teaches that we're saved by Christ crucified alone. In other words, Lutherans. The Methodists have jumped on board, and now ELCA has jumped on board. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America has jumped on with this. Many of the state churches in Europe that call themselves Lutheran have adopted this view. The devil is making great strides with victories, with leading people away to hell because of this. That doesn't mean that somebody who is a member of one of those churches is going to hell. But it means that there are people who are trying to get connected to those churches, think that they're going to heaven, but they're not. They're misled.
And that's why verse 14 is really...
Many are called, few are chosen. Yeah. Go ahead.
The Mohammedans claim that Jesus was perfect, unlike their Muhammad. And Jesus said, "No one comes to the Father but through me."
Mm-hmm.
So how do they reconcile? So we will do it ourselves and ignore the perfect man and believe.
Yeah. You're not asking me to explain Islam, are you? Okay.
It's so illogical.
It is illogical. It is illogical.
The truth makes you
I'm writing this week in the email devotions about 1 Corinthians 7, marriage, sex, marriage, divorce, separation, reconciliation in this week, some of last week and into next week. And in a footnote today that will end up being almost a full page long, but you didn't get it because if you get the devotions because it's a footnote, so you have to buy the book. I talked about a typical scenario in many modern marriages when someone, I'm just going to say, for example, it might be the wife in the marriage. If she decides especially when her kids reach a certain age, she decides that she wants out of this marriage, she will do anything to make it happen. Doesn't matter what she does, what lies she tells, she's going to make that happen, and she's going to make that divorce take place somehow. She's going to make it. And in reading that, and thinking about that, I wondered about the three parts of the human psyche as Freud and Jung and others describe them. Do you know the three pieces of the human mind are that the conscious self is the ego, there's something above it that's a driving force called the superego. But there's something down below that's the animal instinct, that is the id. And many people, when they get out of balance emotionally and intellectually, have this basically is a picture of a house with an attic and a basement. You know, you've got your superego up on top, your ego in the middle, where you spend most of your time, and the id is the basement down below. If one of those gets too big, the thing is out of balance, and that explains all kinds of different, mental, emotional problems. It's a convenient way of looking at it. But when you're talking about sin, you're not talking about any one of the three, but rather all three are affected by sin. And suddenly it's like a house that's infected with like black mold or dry rot or, that apartment I lived in once. What are those critters called? The cockroaches, right? They're just everywhere. And it's not one part of the house. It's the whole thing. And the whole thing needs to be exterminated, the exterminator to come or whatever, or what do you do with black mold? Well, actually there is a solution. Yeah, it's muriatic acid. Almost the only thing that works, but it works.
Just tear the whole thing out and start over.
Or tear the whole thing out and start over. Unfortunately, with the human heart, you can't always do that. But you may need the muriatic acid or the exterminator of the law to come in and crush the sin and cause the response of repentance and so on. All right, this continues as a flowing story. So I'm going to continue with what we have here. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted together how to trap him in his words. So they're showing how sinful they are, how to trap him. They're from the parables we just heard. They're trying to kill the Son. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Now, this just doesn't make any sense at all. The Pharisees were completely opposed to the reign of King Herod because he was an outsider. He wasn't a Jew. He was an Edomite. And Herod was from Idumea, which is Edom. He wasn't a Jew. And he was in with the Romans. He said we should do things as the Romans do. And the Pharisees said we shouldn't have anything to do with him. We shouldn't have anything to do with the Romans. And yet here they are uniting over what? Well, no matter what we do, we got to kill Jesus. That's the only thing they could agree on. Which shows you that politics is rarely, if ever, truly concerned about Christ. Politicians may want to show that they're concerned about religion, but rarely is it truly about Christ. But I don't want to judge any American politician or anything like that. But it's tough to see that. Well, now in this plot, teacher they call him. There's the height of hypocrisy there. Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God. There's 3 hypocrisies. And the way in accord with the truth. There's 4 hypocrisies. And they're just getting done with the preamble of this thing. You are not concerned about gaining anyone's approval. They were, but they know he's not. Because you are not swayed by appearances. So tell us, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Let's talk about this coin for a second. A denarius was a day's wage. It's very difficult to figure out the value of a denarius because what decade are you talking about? Can you read along the left-hand side behind the guy's head? There's like a C and an F, but then it says Augustus. Kind of read that. So this is Caesar Augustus. Okay. In Christ's time, Caesar Augustus would be dead, and the new one would be the guy who stuttered a lot. Do you know his name? My wife used to call him Clavdivs, which is Claudius, because a U and a V are the same in Latin. Don't you guys tell Latin jokes in your marriages? Is that only me? Okay. Well, whatever, That's fine. You have your fun. So Tiberius, this is a denarius. It was, I'm just going to guess, kind of about a day's wages, though, something like that. So it's what you would pay the workers. Well, Jesus knew their evil purposes, and he said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. They bring him a denarius, by the way, somewhere between the size of a quarter and a 50-cent piece. Why would it change in size? Because bad people would shave off some of the silver, and if you shave off enough of them, you get to make new coins. Of course, that's why. And some of those bad people were Caesars. So yeah, that's why they vary. Some of them are kind of more oblong shaped. They're all going to be a little bit off because it wasn't a perfect stamping process, but yeah. In ancient, I know for a fact, ancient little boys did not put a denarius on the railroad tracks and then run to watch how flat it could get when the train ran over it, though. But we used to do that. Whose image and inscription is this? Caesar's, they replied to him. And he said to them, "Therefore give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard this, they were amazed. Then they left him and went away. So he shuts them up. And the same day, still Tuesday, some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to him. The Sadducees were the ones who denied angels. Most of the Old Testament is not the word of God, they said. Nothing after Deuteronomy. They denied that there is a hell. They denied that there are demons. They barely acknowledged that there's a heaven, and probably only some people get to it. Just us, not you guys, is the way they would talk. Why would you be a Sadducee? Pastor Sutton had a wonderful thing he said about them. Does anybody know what it was? Do you remember?
They're sad, you see.
Yeah. They're sad, you see. Yeah, that's marvelous. Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies without having children, his brother should marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Yeah, that's the levirate law. It's in Deuteronomy, it's in Leviticus. So brother dies, he's got to have children, so the brother or the next nearest relative has got to marry or sleep with the widow to raise up children. But they're the dead brother's children, not her son, not his own. Now there were 7 brothers among us. Yes, I am coming to this slide. I'll come back to it, because it's going to be this slide eventually. But let's go backwards. There were 7 brothers among us. The first one died after he married her, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. It was the same with the second brother, and the third, and all the way to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died. So then in the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the 7, since they all married her? So it's not 7 brides, but it's one bride for 7 brothers. Whose wife is she? And what's the answer? Jesus says, you are mistaken, since you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. First of all, he blasts the Pharisees' theology. You don't know what you're talking about. In fact, Jesus says, in the resurrection, so he acknowledges the resurrection, people neither marry nor are given in marriage. He answers their question. Instead, they are like the angels of God in heaven. He acknowledges that there are angels and therefore demons, that there is a heaven, therefore a hell. He undoes all of their theology in 2 verses. But in heaven, the angels do not marry. The angels are not given in marriage. Now, before we go on, I don't know what I just pushed. Is this it? Yeah. I'm sorry, I touched something. What are the 3 main blessings of marriage? From catechism class, you remember the 3 C's? Children, companionship. Remember the third one? Chastity. Not celibacy. That's not a blessing of marriage, but chastity. I used to teach the catechism kids family for children, friendship, and faithfulness. But when I tried to say the 3 F's or the F's, the kids would giggle at me, so I couldn't say that anymore. So I'm back to the 3 C's now, because middle schoolers are, middle schoolers. So, but which of these blessings of those 3 end in heaven, in death? Which one ends? Does children end? Do you get to take your children to heaven with you? Yeah. You don't get to make any more, but you get to take your children to heaven with you. What about the companionship? And then what about chastity? What about faithful sexual relations? That's what Jesus is saying ends in heaven, is that one. The other 2 continue. I know that our time is almost up, and it was like that this morning, but I want to tell you something. A couple months ago, I was at one of the nursing homes, not Oak Hills, and I forget which one it was in town, or it might have been the one in Mankato. But there was an older couple in our fellowship, but not our members, in their 90s, I think. And I got there, and they were already crying before I even started the service. Not that happens after the service usually either, but they were crying, and the woman said, "Pastor, I said, "What is wrong?" And we have to ask you this. They said, "My dad was a pastor, and my grandfather was a pastor in our synod," and said, "And we are remembering that they told us that in heaven, a husband will not know his wife." Now, this couple, that was the last hurdle of their relationship. They were grief-stricken over this. Now, I recognize the problem right away. Do you understand the problem with their question?
It's a Middle English expression.
They misunderstood the word no. In Shakespearean English, which is what the King James Version was translated into, to know was to sleep with or have relations with your spouse, to know your spouse. Adam knew his spouse, and she conceived and so forth. Well, they mistook that because they don't use that dialect in their household. They mistook that and forgot that was its meaning, and they thought it meant to recognize or be friends with. I won't even recognize my wife in heaven or be friends with her anymore. And that's what they were grief-stricken over, which is one of the reasons why we need to change our translation every now and then, because language changes over the years. This coming Sunday, I'm preaching on the 4th, 5th, and 6th commandments, and which is probably not what the men's group thinks I'm going to be preaching on, but it's what I'm preaching on. Oh, it is? Did you guys? Not. You thought I was going to preach out of 1 Corinthians, didn't you? Yeah, I'm not. I'm preaching on Exodus 20. Sorry, I'm preaching on Exodus 20. You're doing the slides, aren't you? You have to know.
I did them. I finished them.
Oh, I'm in trouble. Okay.
Yes, you are.
All right. Okay. In the 5th commandment, though, like I was watching an old war movie the other day. I think it's called Zulu. Great. If you're a guy, wow, what a movie, because it's just battle, and it's just spears and guns, and it's just like blood and guts, right? Great movie. But there's a preacher in that movie who keeps getting drunker and drunker and yelling, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not kill." Aren't there exceptions to the 5th commandment? And shouldn't a minister know the difference? That bothers me about preachers in movies and in TV shows. They never get their theology right. It's like the worst theologians are the ones we see on TV and in movies. They're completely well, why? Because the writers of the movies are the worst theologians in the world. But yeah, no sex in heaven. But the other benefits, for example, the companionship, the friendship you have in marriage, the intimacy of friendship and of knowing one another, also, why would that be limited to one's former spouse? Isn't that elevated to everyone in heaven? And without any of the jealousy, without any of the bad feelings, without any of the selfishness, that the experience of your best day in your marriage becomes a step below what it will be like in heaven. As you, yes, are reunited with your spouse, but also with your parents, with your great-grandparents, with Moses, with Sarah, with Abraham, with Rebekah, with Rachel, with all of them. And that will be our marvelous experience in the resurrection and beyond. God bless you all. Have a good night. Thanks for letting me do this. You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.